Namaskar and welcome you all for the fifth big event that's called the Big Talk, and we have two guests today. We'll introduce them a little later. But before all we introduce our guests who are here on the screen, I would certainly like to introduce our Swamiji Brahmachari Maheshwara Chaitanya ji, who is a computer science specialist, though his degree was in commerce, and then he went on to do his Master of Computer Application. He's been teaching computer science for over 15 to 16 years now. He's a veteran in programming, and he's one of the officials of that International Collegiate for Programming competition, and he has done a wonderful job in making many students to appear for this programming contest. And he was also awarded as a leadership award was given by them for his 1 decade of exposure and working towards making many students appear for this contest. So welcome Swamiji first, and may I request Swamiji as usual to light the lamp. We have Mata Amritaji, who is the Chancellor of our university, who is a globally well-known spiritual leader. So let's light the lamp and seek the blessings of our Chairman, Vice Chancellor. Chairman is the Chairman of Admissions and Chancellor of our university, Mata Amritaji. Loga Samasta Subhino Bhavantu, let the entire globe be healthy and happy, looking at the current situation. So before I take on to the big talk, let me welcome all the viewers, the teachers, the educationalists who are here to listen to the big talk today. I always envy, I always salute, I say kudos to three most important professions. And you are guessing what are those professions? One is a soldier, the other, of course, is a farmer, and the third is a teacher. Now, I could categorize our guest speaker, Mrs. Kavita Mathur, into the educationalist category as a teacher. But then it is a twofold introduction. And indeed, it is not out of place for me to inform all my viewers that she's a lucky lady today because she is married to a soldier and her husband is serving the Indian Army as a colonel. So I think you need two salutes from all of us. One being the wife of a colonel of the Indian Army, the other one as a teacher. And I'm sure if you're doing some farming in your native place, are you from Aurangabad? Or you're from UP or MP? UP.
I'm from
okay.
UP.
If you're doing some farming,
UP and Delhi.
Yeah, I'm sure you would have done some farming at home, and not been a large scale.
For sure.
Absolutely. So I think she needs three salute to be a part of the farming community, to be a part of the defense community, and to be a part of educationalists.
I think it would be unfair to take the credit on behalf of the farmers because they do far more than I can even ever.
Absolutely, you're very moderate, and everything starts on a humble and a simple way, and you have started that farming, and I'm sure you'll go a long way making yourself as a farmer once you retire, maybe.
Yeah, that
I know. See the laughter in you, see the happiness in you when I said you're going to be a farmer maybe after 1 decade or 2 decades. So salute Colonel Saab, Mathur Saab. So all the very best for him, wherever he is. I'm sure that you are in touch with him. Wishing you all the best, and we are honored to have Mrs. Colonel, your wife, to be here with us and discussing for the next 45 to 50 minutes on various aspects of the current situation. Now, I have a lot of things which I can go through as far as your profile is concerned, but it's always better to hear from the horse's mouth. Get my point? So I'm sure a little introduction about ma'am, right, that she has been in the field of education for over 30 years now. 3 decades have passed, and she has been to various schools, and she's been associated with the CBSE Sahodayas. So varieties of achievements she has been going through, and currently, at the moment, when we are in touch with her, she is the Vice President, Academics, for the well-known institution, Velammal Knowledge Park. And it is not out of place to mention that she handles 19 schools in this current situation. And I want, ma'am, it's not an easy joke. I know I've been interacting with many of the principals across the country, and you know how critical or how vital it is, or how difficult or how much of hardship goes in handling a school as a principal, as a leader. But in your case, you are the leader's leader, and we can all sit down here and assume the difficulties that you've been going through in the current situation. And I'm sure that a captain of a ship is not a captain when the sea is clear, but the captain of a ship is a captain when there's a storm in the sea. So now we have a storm situation, and I'm sure you've been handling it perfectly well and keeping everybody at ease. And before again we start our talk, I would like you to take you through the journey of 31 years. And what are your experiences when you first joined? But before that, how did you actually think of becoming a teacher? What really triggered you to be a teacher? Right? Was it by choice or was it by accident? Right? Are you a teacher by accident or are you a teacher by choice? That's number one. What was the experience when you first went into the classroom? Right? Maybe with your principal then, and whichever class you started teaching, what is the experience? Which are the schools that you have been hopping from, and how did you reach this level at this young age? I think she's very happy when I said about young age, right? I know. I can see that. I can see the happiness in you.
Not my neck, you know.
I'll tell you why. Colonel Saab should be around 54 to 56, right? Right. So you are much younger to that. Compared to me, you are much younger. So how did you reach a level of vice president academics with Velammal Knowledge Park? So here you are. Let's welcome you all with a big applause, ma'am. So nice to be present here on this big talk of Amrita Vishwavidyapeetham School of Engineering. Thank you so much. Go ahead, ma'am.
I think, firstly, let me thank you, sir, and Amrita University for, calling me for this very grand big talk. It is indeed my pleasure, contrary to whatever you may have said, to come on this platform to be able to talk. It's always nice because, you see, I think educators are always really toiling hard, and often their efforts are not even acknowledged, forget about felicitated. There are forums for felicitation, but I'm talking in a very general sense. Even now, I think they were the only people who were told, get onto the battle. Since you've already put the analogy, I'm going to use that more. Get onto the battle. You have no equipment. You are not prepared, but just go and fight. And that's literally what teachers were told to do overnight. So I would love to talk about our experiences. Coming to your question, how did my journey begin? It is actually very interesting. 31 years back, I was one of those very early bloomers who'd finished her education very early. I had finished a professional course also in marketing and advertising. And out of the blue, there was this missionary school where I was living, and I happened to know those nuns, and they met me at not a very formal function, and they said, "What is a person like you sitting idle?" Because I was actually looking for a job. And they said, "You come and meet us tomorrow. We don't want to hear any excuse." And that's how I got into teaching, with no clue about teaching at all. Just, I suppose the passion was there, so I went there. And that's how I literally got into teaching. And they made me start with grade 8, no less, at a young age of 21. And the biggest challenge for me was how to look older than what I was.
What was your subject, by the way? What was your
I
subject?
started with teaching English and social sciences.
Okay,
Yeah?
okay. Please go ahead.
And so they were very worried, and they were very particular that I should only come dressed in a sari, because otherwise I'll get lost amongst the students, you know. But it was a very beautiful journey. I think within a month or two, I was completely hooked. And so I would say a lot of what my value system as a teacher comes from those missionaries who took me in. So they were like very particular about, they were fastidious, I would say, about work, how perfect the work should be, how you had to be very, very honest with whatever you do, and with children, try and do your best. So those were 2, 3 things that they were very particular about. And I truly enjoyed my work, and they kind of pushed me in this direction. So that's when, after joining the school, I actually went on and did my professional degree in education. Uh, so that's how it all began, actually. From there was no looking back. I had no thoughts of any other jobs. And like you said, I married an army officer, and that really added to my experience. You know, I always try and contradict the very common phrase that Rolling Stones gather no moss.
Absolutely.
I stand to disagree, because I was one Rolling Stone, and I think my experience is because of me having traveled to so many places, met different kinds of places, people, teachers, different teaching environments, and learning different kind of value system. You know, each place you go, you learn one more way of handling children, one more way of connecting with children. So, you know, my experience has been really wide. I have worked in a Baha'i school in Gangtok. I have taught in a Kendriya Vidyalaya. I have taught in an army school. I have been part of a founding team for an international school in Nasik. I have headed a residential school in the middle of Madhya Pradesh. I have been part of the famous Amity group. I headed one of those schools. I've been part of a very prestigious chain in the north by the name of Jaipuria.
Yeah.
So there I was in a similar profile. And finally, I'm here with Vilamal, which is, I think, an experience beyond every other experience. So I think I'll really like to discuss that later when we come, how wonderfully different this experience has been so far.
Yeah. Ma'am, thank you so much for briefing about yourself, your journey from the beginning till this current position. So thank you for that briefing. And we have Swamiji, who would certainly lead us with the talk. And generally we start off with the first question of Swamiji. So I would like Swamiji to clarify his doubts on various aspects of education. Over to you, Swamiji. You are ready with the first question, right? He is ready with the first question. All right.
Okay, ma'am. It's really impression will be too less if I say it is so impressive to listen to your journey in this whole life so far across different academic institutions and taking up so much of different roles. You see, what we have always seen, or what I have personally observed, is the tendency of the skilled students, or the students who are very much skilled, their tendency to come to the academics is less, or it is decreasing. I am specifically talking from the engineering domain.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the students who pass out from our campus, or almost all the engineering colleges, so-called top engineering colleges or top engineering colleges, they join the industry. And we ourselves find it very hard to get the best faculty, because once the students tend to join the industry with high pay, and what will be the condition of the teaching profession or getting the best quality teachers? Best quality teachers is, it has nothing to do with technology. Being a technology person, I say that it has nothing to do with technology. But as you said, you know, how effectively can we turn the students to be the best academicians, or what is the role that an engineering college can play in this context?
So I think again the onus lies with teachers themselves. We as teachers are supposed to be role models.
Yeah.
Somewhere I think we are not doing our job as a role model good enough. We are only training them to move on to the next step in life. If the students saw us as good role models, they would probably want to emulate our examples. So somewhere I feel the first responsibility lies on the teacher herself or himself, whether it at any level. I would say school, of course it begins at the school level, because that's the very first experience a child has with this teacher, and the child should actually find the teacher aspirational as well as inspirational. If that happens, I think somewhere the first seed has been planted. So I think the responsibility lies on the teachers to rise to that level where the child can look upon them as a role model. The second responsibility, I would say, is very strongly the society's. I think we as a society do not truly value our teachers as much as we should. On Teachers' Day, there are a huge lot of platitudes. You can hear people, you know, singing pains on teachers everywhere. Every media is full of Happy Teachers' Day, remembering people. But through the year or in times of crisis is when you really see what is the true opinion. Let's take a very simple example of this particular crisis, whether it is an engineering college, a professional college, or a regular school. Has the society truly come out in support of the teachers? Have they thought, okay, how do we support the teachers in taking this job forward? Or has the conversation more about being, why are the school charging fees? Why are the schools being so commercial? The whole conversation has moved in a wrong direction. If we think our children are not listening to all this, we are very sadly mistaken. We can preach anything that we want to our children, but our children learn from what they imbibe from their society. So I think, and I don't hold any one person responsible. The society is made up of all of us. We need to very consciously go back to the time when we respected our gurus. I mean, so that is why I said, for the society to respect the guru, it is the responsibility of the guru first to rise to that level, to ensure the society shows that responsibility. And finally, I think somewhere we do need to change the way we are addressing education in our society. You know, it is a very, very means-oriented education where children are only learning, or rather getting into colleges with the end in mind, which is to earn money. And unfortunately, in our country, the education industry is definitely not associated with money. Probably the coaching industry is, but not our schools and colleges. So that's where I think we need to also address the issue. So these, I think, if we work upon these things, there can definitely be a change. We still have a lot of good students who go abroad and get into academia. It's a surprising thing.
Swamiji, you like to add on one or two questions, or how do you want to go about leading the talk?
I'll add it maybe later, but you can continue.
Okay, thank you so much, Swamiji. I fully agree with you, ma'am, that the teachers have to grow from an ordinary teacher to an extraordinary teacher. In my own life, there are so many teachers who taught me from my first standard till my degree, post-graduation. But then there are only few of the teachers I could still remember. And those are the teachers who have done some sort of difference in my life. And especially I have a teacher whom I call, I am from Kendriya Vidyalaya, like where you taught. I'm from Kendriya Vidyalaya, Heavy Vehicles Factory, Avadi. And I have a teacher who taught me in my 8th standard. Her name is Mrs. Susan Chaco. I just can't forget her because she wasn't a teacher. She was more than a teacher. She was like my mom. I mean, that like, I got into a lot of trouble, and then I actually wanted to commit suicide. So I didn't want to share this decision with my parents. And I went to my teacher, Mrs. Susan Chaco, and she totally changed me. The type of confidence she has given to me in my 8th standard, that was the year 1970-71. That is the reason that today I'm alive. Otherwise, I would have probably taken that stern or a foolish action, of committing suicide. So teachers have to grow from an ordinary to an extraordinary level. And to grow from ordinary to extraordinary, these are the small little, beyond the classroom, I would say, a little extra time to be spent with us. So you have explained it so well. And my next question to you about the leadership, we are coming to that. Everybody knows the current situation. I need not say what the problems that we are facing today. Everybody knows across the globe. Everybody knows the hardship that each individual is going through. In today's context, how should academic leadership should look like? How do you expect, if you have to draw a paradigm and say, look, this is what I expect the leaders. When I say leaders, the principals. This is how I would like them to be looking like, so if you can add some addition to this is what, most of the principals are taking care, but beyond that, you have some vision in your mind because you have 19 principals working with you. So how do you expect them to look like in this current scenario? Over to you now.
So my first thought and the only word I would like to begin with is empathetic.
Okay.
I feel the leadership, particularly in any kind of crisis, needs to be empathetic, very, very strongly empathetic. Having said that, I think taking the present situation, I'd like to quote a very dear colleague whom I happened to hear yesterday. He said, every leader should have 3 A's, to plan out the crisis. Firstly, the first A is anticipate. As a leader, you should have the ability to anticipate what the situation can turn into, what is likely to happen. Anticipate your situation, then get on to the next A, which is analyze. Analyze the situation with reference to your own leadership, your own team, your own group of children. See how the situation can impact. And then, of course, comes the last A, which is the action plan. I very, very strongly believe that a good leader is one who has an action planned well in advance. You can't get into an act without planning. Sometimes you don't get much time, but you still need to plan. And that's what probably helps you cross the bridge much better if you've taken 2 minutes aside to sit down and plan your events. That's very, very important. I feel, and and a crisis cannot be handled overnight, and we don't become leaders overnight. So there is a lot that has already gone into leadership, that has gone into you being able to manage it. I think one of the strong things in that would be, and I'm talking about as an academic leader, is at the end of every action, thought that comes to your mind, the one thing that should be always at the end of it should be the students' learning outcomes. Every action, every plan, every thought that you take should be targeted with that end aim in mind. How is it going to reach me to my goal of achieving my students' learning outcomes. We keep that in mind. And of course, I very strongly feel that if as a leader I have worked upon creating a good culture, creating a good set of value systems, there's no crisis which my team cannot help me overcome. So this is what I say. You are not audible, sir.
So as you rightly said, anticipate, analyze, and the action plan is the strategy that you've been using. Now you have 19 schools with whom you are working and 19 leaders working. Is the same like anticipate, analyze, action plan, same for all? It's one size for all, or you need to look at for different leaders, different styles of strategies? Is it the same or the different ones?
I think it is moral. So the basic structure always has to be same. But
okay.
it varies. Some people do not probably need too much of analysis because in the process of anticipating, they've already finished with the analysis. So there it depends on individual leadership. But more or less as a head, I would say the action plan has to be like this. You know, you have to go well prepared. You know, here I actually would like to really quote you know, there's a very interesting quotation by Peter Drucker that the only three things that happen naturally in an organization are friction, confusion, and underperformance.
Okay.
Everything else requires leadership.
Okay, so Peter Drucker's maybe, you know, I think there is some truth in what he's saying.
It's so very true,
Absolutely,
and doesn't really apply to educational leadership.
Education,
You know?
absolutely, that's
It
fantastic.
applies to leadership everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, my next clarification, ma'am, is on the current situation of teaching and learning process, which you call it as TLP. I mean, today we are talking about live classes. You know, we were never thinking of live classes about 3 or 4 months back. We have classrooms, and the teachers leave home and they get back at 5 o'clock, so they forget everything about the home. The moment they are back, they start thinking about the home.
True.
Now, you think this live classes, if you compare it with the real classes, live classes and real classes, can this live classes overtake the real classes in the future? Which would be better, given a choice? We can conduct both. Which would be your choice, whether should we going for live classes or should we have the real classes? If given an option to you to decide what is what, how do you go about taking a call on that?
So see, technology has always been around. I would say almost 10, 12 years with the invent of smart boards. We had our first brush with technology many, many years back. It's more than a decade now. But how well we adapted to technology is a question most managements would really put a question mark on, you know. And I'm not talking about school principals, I'm talking about management. They would really like to question how there was, and not just smartboard, we had a lot of other technology available to us. How much did we really adapt? The reason why you see these live classes happening, honestly, right now, because we have no other choice.
Absolutely, no choice at all.
And probably in the future, they may become the order of the day. Looks like it will happen. Life is changing at a very fast pace. But I think nothing can replace a face-to-face interaction. If in the live classroom, or the live classes, we can somehow emphasize on the asynchronous teaching, you know, where the children are able to get the one-on-one interaction, probably it may happen, say 10 years later, 5 years later, 7 years later, I really don't know. But I do remember reading there's a school in New York where and this was not now, this was last year, they were planning that the students will come to school only once a week. The rest of the week, they would study from home and they will take personal appointments with teacher to have their teaching, learning. So I don't think so any replacement is a possibility in the near future. What ideally will work best for the Indian scenario is a blend of both.
All right, I think, yeah. Anything else you'd like to add on this, or this is? I have a problem. Yeah, you are going to say something. You like to add something?
I don't have anything. Right now, we are all a product of our circumstances.
Okay.
So taking to technology hasn't happened very willingly, but if this continues for 2 months, I think the scenario will change.
Absolutely. As you see, you started off with saying that the teachers and all of us were forced to go fight the battle with no arms. Your husband, Colonel Saab, is ready with all the arms and everything is AK-47, everything is fine. Anything goes, he can attack. But even under these circumstances, our teacher is doing extremely well. I mean, the fight is going on extremely well. Salute, and let us compliment our teachers who is doing a good job in not having a disconnect between the student and the learning. So that is being done. But
there's a huge effort involved.
Absolutely. But ma'am, there are problems. And I want you to help us out to overcome the problems. That's all leadership is all about. The problem for the teachers today is facing the camera, right? She or he has to face the camera. She doesn't know 40 students sitting in each different locations. She doesn't know whether they are listening to her or they are thinking something else. So there is a sort of a doubt in the minds of the teacher whether she's just saying something to just finish her 40 minutes. So whether the students have understood, the attention factor is there. That is number 2. Number 3, she's at home. She's at home. She has her family. Suddenly her mother will say, mother is there, little children there. So they could trouble her. And the fourth is, the fourth is, what I generally find is, end of the day, the teachers feel that they have no overall satisfaction of conducting live classes, unlike going to the classrooms. So they are under some sort of, I would say, depression. Like they're doing the job well, but mentally they are not come out of this. And this side is Corona, this side is live class. So what are the advices? What are the suggestions? What are the directions? What are the guidelines, ma'am, with your experience, you can tell our teachers to make that live class more effective and impactful? Over to you, ma'am.
See, if you remember in the previous question, the first word I said was empathetic.
Empathetic.
Let's understand our teachers are going through a very, very tough time. When I say they walked in unprepared, technology has been around us for a long time. But we were not really using technology the way we are being asked to use it just now. We were randomly bringing in, some elements here and there. Now, suddenly, overnight, the teachers were told, go online. Go online, not even from school, but from the 4 walls of their house. They may not even be, not everybody wants to bring their house into the forefront. They may not even have enough space to conduct a class with the utmost quietness around the room. There might be children in her house. After all, let's take it. 70% of our teachers are ladies, are females. And they have a lot of pressure, not just ladies, even the gents have a lot of family pressure. With this coronavirus thing happening here, there are people who are falling sick. They might be members of our family. That doesn't stop us from doing our job. We have a lot of pressure upon us to maintain varying degrees of hygiene and cleanliness in our own house, along with everything else. We also have to battle with the problems of no support system. India is not a country where, like the West, we all are self-sufficient. We are very heavily dependent upon our support staff at home. Now is a situation where you had in the very, very different circumstances. You have too much tremendous pressure on you. And then comes the biggest challenge of making sure your children are listening to you.
Yeah, that's the most
so like that's the ultimate, that's like the icing on the cake. You are putting in so much effort and still you're not sure whether the children are actually learning.
Absolutely, yeah.
So then the challenge, how do you, so we keep devising new techniques. So, it was very, very challenging in the sense that we at Velamal, so I must actually bring forth to you the person, our director, Mr. Shashi Kumar, and his wife, Mrs. Gitanjali. Both of them are very, very progressive thinking people. And you know, at no point of time through their conversation did I get the impression that this crisis is overbearing. What are we going to do? Constantly, the encouragement was, let's do something now. Okay, now what? Now what? So when I think the crisis had just about hit us, sometime around 15th of March, we had already started planning our online classes, to the extent from beginning our teachers training program.
That's great. That's great.
Because the first thing that came across is that there are a few teachers who are very well equipped with handling technology, but not the average teacher. So the first job was to train the teacher with all kinds of technology, the platform that we were planning on using. So we were using Microsoft Teams, we were using Zoom, we were using Google. It was very important to ensure the teachers knew how to handle those.
Yes.
So I think we went through almost 3 to 4 rounds of training for all our 2000 plus teachers across all schools. It was a huge exercise, and we insisted upon all of them going, and this was only training in technology. I'm not even talking about the changed pedagogy. Actually, the pedagogy doesn't really change. It's how you use the tools for your pedagogy that changes.
Absolutely.
So that was a second level of training that we put our teachers through. And then when we were doing the trainings, we actually had to devise ways and means of ensuring that the children were also on their toes like the teachers, you know. So I'll give you random examples, some examples which we've been trying to try it out, you know, share a set of notes with children with blanks in it.
Okay.
So when the teacher is doing, they need to fill it up and submit it at the end of the session. Send the presentation to the children a day in advance. And then the next day, the teacher's questioning them on the presentation. So the purpose is that you shift the onus of learning from the teacher teaching to the student learning. That's the most important thing. The minute that, so that has been our endeavor constantly, to shift the onus of learning onto the student. Because you see, parents are worried, teachers are worried. Teachers are worried they have to teach, parents are worried that the children need to learn. But the true stakeholder, that's the student, he needs to be actually involved. I won't say worried, he just needs to be involved in the process. And that has been our endeavor, that shift the focus of teaching from teaching to learning.
All right.
And all that we've been talking about for all these years, you know, teacher not on the stage, by the sage, by the stage and all that.
Yeah.
Now's the time to actually put it into practice. So how good a facilitator can the teacher be is what needs to be applied now. And I think in the learning.
Yeah, as you rightly said, sage in the stage and a guide in the side. Is that what you mentioned? And now it's time for Swamiji to shoot his billion-dollar question to ma'am. Over to you, Swamiji. And he's waiting there. You know, why is that? You know, he's there. So he's going to ask you a billion-dollar question. Over to you, Swamiji.
We can't hear, sir. Yeah.
So I'll postpone the $1,000,000 question.
I know I might end up claiming it.
Yeah.
That'll
be my.
Okay.
I was just observing the way in which you are so confident, the way in which you are so confident that you can bring up teachers to this level, to the level which you think, which you have in your mind. And when you talk about an organization, it is not just 4 walls. It is a combination or integration or bringing together different type of individuals, right? So when you say that different type of individuals, it is different type of mindsets.
Absolutely.
Correct. So what is it that you do to make sure that your objective is met? and how does it percolate to different levels? Because an organization will have different structure. It will have its own organizational structure, different levels. And how do you ensure that it is reaching to the lowest level to meet the common objective, especially in this crisis situation?
Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. I again would like to take you back to our director, Mr. Shashi Kumar. Somewhere I think the culture of an organization permeates from upwards to downwards. And I really would like to acknowledge his humility, his effort. He's the first person up every morning and the last person sending messages to this team. I think that in itself is the most beautiful motivation for any individual. And, you know, he gives, so for me, the value comes from him, you know, he shows this value that there is nobody whom you cannot talk to if you need to. Whether it is a driver, it is a peon, it is a conductor, it is anybody. He will just pick up the call either to, even the children, you know, if it is their birthday, he insists the message has to go from him. So it's that the personal connect, that's the culture that he's brought about. That personal connect is very, very important. We have to build that connect amongst the teachers. So, you know, when this crisis happened, the first thing that I think one needs to do is look inwards. And that's what we also did as a group. You know, we looked inwards, we got all our schools together, and they've been doing exceptionally well. Some schools have been doing better than most. Some have been just come up in a year or two. In fact, we have 3 new schools which have started off this year. So they are the fledglings in the group. They were a different lot altogether. We brought all of them together, put them under different zones, put the zonal heads together, and, you know, we decided we are going to strengthen our communication, because I think for any crisis, the key word is good communication. And in a typical school situation, there were 3 important stakeholders: the student, the parent, and the teachers. And the communication with each stakeholder has to be very, very strong. So we began, when this crisis hit, we began with a communication with our teaching community. We brought all of them together. We started having more conversations with them. We started having conversations. The zonal heads started having conversations with their principals and teachers. Principals started having conversations because now there was no way of us meeting together. It was only a meeting through technology or phone. I mean, if that can also be called technology nowadays. So the thing was, it was very important that the communication channel was strengthened. The next stakeholder was our parent. We had, I think by now we must have had, I don't even remember how many rounds of communication we've had with our parents, keeping them informed, assuring them of what we are trying to do, because we are trying to make the situation as normal as possible for our parents and our children. Because actually the worst hit stakeholder in this is the little child. The children hardly spent any time at home. They live with, the present generation lives literally with their peers. And now they're completely disconnected and are permanently with their parents.
Yeah, that's
right. The school, and many a times, like you rightly said just now, your teacher was your saving grace.
Absolutely.
So it is so often that our teachers have been our saviors. So also, this is another thing we have done. We have made our communication with our children very, very robust. It's not that we've reached the perfection level. We still have a long way to go, but this has been our channel for moving forward, a very, very strong communication. You know, then the second thing has been to try and make the situation appear as normal as possible. You know, it's a very cliched statement, but the only thing constant is change. So let's look at it as a new constant and not really worry too much about what's going to happen. So we literally are taking it step by step. We have an action plan for July, August. We have communicated to all our stakeholders across all 19 schools. We have created an openness in the organization where anybody has the freedom to approach anybody. There are no restrictions that way, which normally in a school probably would exist. You know, parents have the freedom to call up anybody they feel like. And I think that has really made the difference. We've been hearing a very marked change in the kind of communications we are receiving from parents, from our community. So I would say communication is the key word for handling the crisis right now.
Absolutely, communication. Of course, it is faster now, unlike the earlier times when we were students. I think communication is the key to success in any organization or any such educational institutions, no doubt about it, ma'am. My clarification is again required. I always have a feeling that there's no one in this world who can raise the hand and say, I have no problems in life. Every individual will have some problem or the other. And I believe that these problems have not come to stay with you, these problems have come to pass. And we are going through a problematic pandemic, coronavirus for the last almost about 4 to 5 months. And that's maybe 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, we are not sure as to when it will go. But it's going to go, so nothing to worry about it. Take care of yourself, be safe, and that's being told upon, said upon in many, whether you open the TV or open your, open your mobile phone. So these instructions is coming. My question to you is, in the event of government approving the schools to open, maybe in the next 3 months or 4 months, whatever it is, whichever time it is, what are the strategies? I'm sure because you said proactiveness and you already have analyzed, you already have an action plan. In case the school opens in the next 6 months, what are the steps that the teachers and the school must take so that we don't have a re-attack of all this and we don't lose lives? So over to you, ma'am.
So almost a month back, we've already created a COVID crisis management committee.
Okay.
We've already got our SOPs in place.
Okay.
Because you see, we have a few residential schools also. And we have children from not only India, but abroad also who come and reside in our schools. So our crisis is not, of course, this crisis is not limited to India alone. It is across the world. So it affects everyone. But you know what happens is, like I said, well prepared, half job done.
Okay.
So that is what we tried to do. This was something which we took over last month. The entire activity because we were actually planning that earlier. The government was saying maybe by the first week of August we might open up.
Yes.
So things look very different now. Absolutely. So sometime by May end, I think we had already put our committee and our SOP in place, and we had already created an action plan of how we are going to go about it. Again, a lot, in our cases in India, man proposes, government disposes. So we may plan and we may plan. We have kept a couple of options. We've thought of a couple of options. What if the government says you can only bring in 50% of your strength? What are we going to do then? What happens? So we are prepared with many options. It could be like, half school coming in. So actually, see, the ideal situation would be when you open with only senior secondary, it has to be a staggered opening. It cannot happen that the whole school opens in one go. It'll be probably senior secondary coming in because they are the most important stakeholders. Then we bring in 9, 10. Again, we have a structure in place, but it is different for different schools because the new schools don't have huge strength. There are schools where we have 3,000 children, more than that also in some of them. So the policy for them is completely different vis-a-vis a policy for a school which is only 500-600 children. Again, policy is very different for a residential school, where let me share with you, we still have a lot of staff staying there. You know,
Okay.
So in fact that has already been put into place. And again, I really would like to give a lot of credit to our director. He is the person. So we have a complete hospital, medical staff, everything in place in our campus. So partially, a lot of things are already being implemented. The safety measures, as have been advocated. However, now, I'm sure you've also read, we've been just hearing that coronavirus is now an airborne possibility.
Yeah, true.
That does make us think and review what we planned.
This is the only way.
Absolutely. This is definitely a part of our lives moving forward, but in a school environment, this alone does not suffice. You have to think of other appropriate action plans. So we are definitely, we're prepared. But having said that, I think we still need to do a lot of preparation.
So you're all geared up to, in the event of schools reopening in the maybe next couple of months. So everything has been geared up. Now we are at we are just about 7 minutes more. So what begins well has to end up well, and we began with Swamiji's question, the first question, and I will now request Swamiji to come back again with his maybe final or the last but one question. Over to you, Swamiji, for your further clarification with ma'am. Yeah. Over to you.
Okay, ma'am. I have basically I have two questions.
Sure, sir.
So one is that we have come through several what I should say, several positions, several institutions, and you might have faced a lot of situations in life. Of course, you are talking about the crisis today. How do you ensure that the organization is not affected when you move from current organization to another organization? Do we need to train somebody else?
So there's a very simple answer to this. I very strongly believe people don't work, systems and processes work, you know.
Absolutely.
That's been my key learning for so many years, and I think I owe my gratitude to one of I worked in an army school, you know, and I really would like to acknowledge her name was Mrs. Call. She was the principal there at that point of time. And I learned this from her. The school ran so efficiently. Army schools, as you know, have mostly army officers' wives as teachers. And at that point of time, I'm talking about almost 12, 15 years, maybe more than that. It was a small town in Maharashtra. It was the number 2 schools amongst the army schools. And almost 20% of teachers moved out every year. But the transition happened so seamlessly because the process was laid out so beautifully. And that happens when you actually empower your teachers. I don't believe that as a leader, I need to micromanage, then I'm actually not doing justice to anybody. I hire good talent if I'm going to micromanage. This is what I do. So I feel that I have never ever left an organization in, with half complete work. So I have always moved on. Sometimes it was a matter of necessity. Sometimes it was just that we had an agreement for a certain number of years, because, you know, it has been in all my years, my speciality has been taking up troubled schools and putting them to right. It's a strange profile, but that's what I have enjoyed doing. And so I always went, and I thought, if I cannot complete in 2 years of sorting out a school, I'm not really going to be able to sort it out ever. So that way it was very helpful. So this is what I feel, you know, transitioning from organization doesn't matter. It's if you have good systems, if as a leader you're putting good systems in place, it doesn't matter who heads it.
But how far a person has to be a new individual or a new person that coming into the system, he has to get accustomed with that, right? Or he has to be capable enough to follow that same process. And the processes we have to keep changing according to the situations.
Absolutely.
Correct. So it is ultimately the attitude of the person coming into the system.
So, sir, the most important thing is, this is what I would say to people who are wanting to move into a new organization. One should have a very positive attitude. You can't walk into an organization thinking everything is wrong over here.
Mm-hmm.
Your predecessor has not wasted time over there. You definitely are coming with a lot of new ideas, but value what is already existing. Take what is there, see the goodness in that, and bring it to the next level. You don't have to, like there's a very old saying we've been teaching children, you know, to make your line longer, bigger, you don't have to erase the other one. You have to simply stretch yours a little longer. So I don't think so. In fact, I would say if a good foundation has been set by your predecessor, you are a blessed person. The right attitude can actually help you take the organization higher, because when the organization moves higher, your personal growth is guaranteed. There can be no personal growth without the growth of the organization. People who think like that are, I don't think so, are really looking at a long-term growth.
I think, Kavita, I think, ma'am, you rightly said, and Swamiji, I also have something to tell about myself. You know, like I also keep moving from one place to another, and when you get a transfer, I used to be in sales and marketing, so I used to work for tire companies. So you are transferred from Hyderabad to, let's say, Bangalore, and when somebody else takes over, and he does a better job than me. Right, he produces better results than me. His sales is much more than me. But the credit must come to me, not to him, because I have made the foundation, you know, so much that he's able to reap the fruit now. So the credit must goes to you. If it goes bad, then I have to be blamed. I still remember that. So moment you move out, yeah, you are saying something. Please carry on.
Unfortunately, you know, we've already moved on.
Yeah, moved on. Not moved
I mean,
on.
it applies for you and me both. We've moved on. So
on and on.
It doesn't really matter, you know. Absolutely. I feel what happens behind, once we've moved on, there's no point looking backwards. We can't go back in time and change anything.
Correct.
And we can, so this is one thing I would, and I'd say it with great pride, that till date, every organization I have moved on from, I have stayed on very good terms with them. Till date, we make it a point to connect every year on all the important occasions with every one of the management that I'm in touch with.
That's a fantastic ending, you know, that wherever you have worked, see, that's what I'm saying, wherever you have worked, you can still walk in there. You can walk in right there. That is what it is. There are many of us who leave the company, but can't go back to the company because this guy has done something wrong there. He cannot face those people. But in your case, you can straight away walk with your cheeks up, like your husband marching to the battlefield.
You give him so much credit.
No, in fact, one of my child ambition was to get into the defense forces, but very unfortunately, I couldn't clear the examination. Not that I went into SSB, but then my brother-in-law was in the army. As I said, he retired as a colonel from the army, and my brother was in CRPF, and my father was also. So all uniformed, like that of yours. I think I think your husband's
is the third generation.
Yeah, third generation. So I think that is that's indeed a lovely discussion that we had in various aspects. And if Swami permits me now, any other questions, Swami?
I have one more question.
I know you have. That's why I asked you. I can see that.
Which is the state which you love most?
That's.
Sorry, I'm sorry, I didn't get it.
Which is the state that you love most? We have 28 states. Don't tell me UP. Don't tell me UP.
No. I won't say that. So, you know, one is always disdainful about one's own roots. It's something we've learned as Indians, you know. This is something we've learned as Indians.
No, from the professional view.
So, from the professional view, I would say I have had very good experiences in a lot of states. From the management perspective, I honestly will say this is the very first time I've moved anywhere beyond Maharashtra. And it's a very different experience, very nice experience. It's a pleasure working with people in Tamil Nadu. It's truly a pleasure, you know, especially after Delhi. No comments about people in Delhi or UP for that matter, but it's a very different culture. You know, people are very, very nice here in Tamil Nadu. That's the only word I would like to say.
So
Really
you like Tamil Nadu the most, I would say.
Yes, I liked Maharashtra also. It was again a beautiful place to work. Actually, you know what? It's very difficult to really. If I name the states, I began my career with. So this is literally my walkthrough: Uttar Pradesh, Jammu, Gangtok, Sikkim, Rajasthan, Punjab, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, back to Delhi, and then now in Tamil Nadu. So that's the number of states I've covered, you know, over the years.
Oh.
But it's not the place that matter, you know, it is the people who make the experience different, I would say.
So let me come to the question. So you are given suppose if you are given a key position in the state government, especially in the education sector, what will be your first priority?
Ma'am, the question is very simple. You are made the educational minister. You are made the educational minister. And what would be the first priority? What are the reforms you would bring in first?
So let me share the scenario is so different in each state.
Okay.
It's very, very different in each state.
But you are a problem solver.
Sorry?
You're a central cabinet. You are sitting in the central cabinet, Government of India. You are made the MHRD, Minister of MHRD. Let's go ahead with that.
I don't even think that far. But you know, okay, as a pure academic perspective, I would really like to make sure somehow, if we can, the focus shifts from rote learning to true learning. That would be my main, because I think the biggest problem is that we are not really focused on learning anymore. That would be one thing. And another very important thing would be somehow I feel a person who's not full of idealism should not be in the teaching profession. We should not monetize the teaching profession. The nobility that was associated, it would be my endeavor to bring back that. That would probably, like I said, the first responsibility rests with the teacher himself or herself. So that's what I would like to really build upon, you know, a good background with good teachers. I think we really need to empower our teachers, train our teachers, give them all the necessary skills. We really need to work upon our teaching colleges, you know.
Kavita ma'am, yeah, that's right. Kavita ma'am, Lieutenant Colonel Rathore, right, from Rajasthan, when he joined the Indian Military Academy, he never thought that he's going to be a minister, but
Absolutely.
he became a minister. He became a minister.
True.
And you mentioned that you're not looked far ahead of what I mentioned.
I don't even want to look in that direction.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, you know, we don't know what's going to happen, what is next for us, but then we can always wish you a very bright future with your current assignment as the Vice President Academics for Velamal Knowledge Park. And I'm very confident from the interactions that we had now that sky is not going to be the limit for you in life. You'll go beyond the limit of the sky and shower all your knowledge and share all your knowledge, which will benefit millions and billions of teachers who are in the field of education. Last word from Swami, and then over to you, and we close the show. Swami, just a blessing from your side. Bless ma'am, bless family, because they are into the field of education, the teacher profession, and her husband is, of course, as a soldier. So we need to double salute ma'am on this occasion. Thank you so muji. Over to Swamiji for this.
Yeah, in fact, we have been holding this big talk since maybe the last, since June, and we have been observing that there are true leaders, and we try to bring the best leadership people to share this knowledge across the teaching community. And it was very nice to listen to you, especially learn from you.
Correct.
the key aspects in managing this crisis with a smile in the morning. After managing a crisis, you just came back and joined us. Heartfelt thanks from Amrita, and we really cherish the moments this 1 hour, because it was very lively interaction. We could learn a lot from you, and I'm sure that the participants also have learned, and there is some takeaway today morning. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Over to you, ma'am. You have to say something before
Thank
we
you
close.
so much. Thank you, Swamiji, for your blessings. Thank you, sir. It was indeed, I think, a very nice morning for me also. Thank you for all your big words, I would say. I'm not sure whether I can live up to all those, but let's pray that your blessings are with me all through. And not only with me, with all of us. And I hope your blessings, your support will be with the entire group in the months and years to come.
Absolutely, we'll see. We will ensure that prayers are there always with you. And once again, on behalf of Amrita Vishwavidyapeetham, this is Methul Krish signing off at the moment. So till we meet again, Jai Hind.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. God bless.